Welcome to the Mortarboard, the administrator's source for solutions in higher education. We tell you about challenges other schools have faced, benchmark the problem, share their best practices and epic fails, and invite you to consider whether what worked for them might also work at your institution. Hosted by longtime college president Dr. Dan Barwick, this is the Mortarboard, the source for solutions in higher education.
Welcome to the Mortarboard, your source for solutions in higher education. I'm Dan Barwick. Welcome to the podcast. If the content of this podcast interests you, then you'll enjoy my new book, Risk and Reward: How Small Colleges Get Better Against the Odds. It's now available from Amazon in ebook, paperback, and audiobook format. The best way to find it is to head over to my blog, mortarboardblog.com, and click on the link on the front page. If you have any thoughts about the book, don't hesitate to send me an email and let me know what you think. My guest today is Nicole Lynn Lewis, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Generation Hope, an organization which she founded in March 2010. To ensure that all student parents have the opportunities to succeed and experience economic mobility, Generation Hope engages education and policy partners to drive systemic change and provides direct support to teen parents in college, as well as their children, through holistic two-generation programming. She was named a 2021 Luminary in Economic Mobility by the 1954 Project alongside 4 other innovative Black leaders. She was named a CNN Hero, was an inaugural recipient of the Black Voices for Black Justice Award. She received a Boulder Fund Award through the Education Leaders of Color, and was named a Woman Who Means Business by the Washington Business Journal. She was also a PBS Story of Champions honoree, and was named one of the top 50 exemplar alumni of George Mason University. She was named the National Grand Prize winner of the Rosalind S. Jaffe Award, which recognizes everyday heroes who are making the world a better place for women or children. She has been featured on major news outlets including Good Morning America, CNN, NBC Nightly News, and The Washington Post. She holds a master's degree in social policy and communication from George Mason University and a bachelor's degree in English from the College of William and Mary. Nicole appears today on the podcast to discuss her article, How Colleges Tell Student Parents They Don't Belong, in The Atlantic magazine. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Your article points out that in many ways, classes and campus life are designed for those who come to college right out of high school and fit our traditional view of what a college student looks like. And yet, despite this, 74% of undergraduates in this country don't wholly fit that profile. So what does that 74% of college students really look like?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think often these students, that 74%, are referred to as non-traditional students. And when we really step back and look at 74%, that's the majority of college-going students in this country that don't fit the traditional, the quote-unquote traditional definition of a college student. As you said, they're not coming straight out of high school. They're not necessarily living on campus. Many of them are first-generation college students. Many of them are working multiple jobs while going to school or are going to school part-time. And then a population that is very close to my heart and is so connected to the work we do at Generation Hope is that many of them are raising children. You know, they're balancing caregiving while going to school. And so instead of referring to them as non-traditional college students, we really like to talk about them being today's college students, because this is really the face of undergraduates in this country. And we need to really start talking about them as being the majority as opposed to the minority, because 74% is such a significant number. And so day-to-day life for this population, it looks a lot different than the movies of lounging on a college campus and playing volleyball in between your classes and
yeah, I played a lot of ping pong.
a lot of ping pong, partying all night and waking up and going to class the next day. That's not the reality for so many college students in this country. It's how do you balance it all? How do you balance so many responsibilities, from caregiving to working and going to school to having to, figure out how do you make all the dots connect financially. Many students are students with low income and are trying to figure out just how to put enough gas in the car to make it to campus. So life is a lot different for this student population. And we have to start thinking about what needs to shift in higher ed to make sure that we're removing barriers for them.
Well, I know that change in higher ed, it can be pretty glacial, but why do you think that colleges are still designed for the minority of students rather than the majority?
If we take a step back and we look at the origins of our higher education system in America, all of our early colonial colleges, Harvard, my alma mater, William and Mary, really came from Oxford, right? And these schools that are really kind of defined what higher education looks like and defined the target population. And so our early colonial colleges baked in the DNA for the higher education system that we know today. They were aimed at serving white men with resources. And that is not the college majority, and especially that 74% in terms of today's college students. Much of our systems, our traditions, our institutional policies are set up to serve this target population that is no longer reflective of who's going to college each and every day in this country. And it is excluding so many people. It's excluding, student parents. It's excluding first generation college students. It's excluding students with few resources who are working so hard to get their college degrees. And so we have to really uproot a lot of these long-standing traditions and norms and policies throughout our higher education system, throughout community colleges, throughout four-year schools, throughout even HBCUs, and really think about how do we do this differently to better serve the majority of students in this country. And so it does require a lot of work because that DNA is strong and it really has influenced the way that we serve students and the way that we determine who is worthy of getting supports and resources within higher ed.
It makes me wonder, how many people are turned off by what they find at a college when they sense it is absolutely not designed for them. Obviously, enrollment at most schools is very, very challenging right now, unless you're at a very selective institution. And so I'm just wondering why schools don't see the opportunity to make a school resonate better with the 74% of potential students.
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to these are long-standing, practices and norms. And these practices have really influenced so much of our approach to doing this work and thinking about uprooting these practices and really thinking differently, doing some power shifting, and bringing different decision makers to the table. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think that, the willingness to do that, the interest to do that is there. But it's hard work. It's going to require people to roll up their sleeves and really challenge the way that things have traditionally been done within higher education and to say, we don't have to do it this way. And I think COVID has helped many institutions, many folks working in higher education to think differently, to say, wow, we can offer online learning. We can do asynchronous classes. We can invest in emergency grants to students to help them pay, and that little bit of rent that they need to make sure they're not evicted or to help out with childcare expenses. The pandemic has really forced higher education to think about things differently and to say, no, we don't have to do it this way that it's always been done. But when you think about what had to happen, we had to have a global pandemic. for people to really get on that bandwagon and to say, we're leaving so many students behind in the ways that we've traditionally done things. So I think there's an interest, there's a desire, there's so much attention around equity within higher education, but it does require hard work. It requires an investment of time and resources and a willingness to do things differently and lean into the discomfort that comes with that. And that's not easy.
Your article specifically is addressing the experience of student parents, so that I want to focus on that. The article describes how the 4 million college students who are also parents have a very different college experience than non-parents. And you've certainly given us a little bit of detail up to that point, but I wonder if you could go into some detail about how the student-parent experience is significantly different.
Well, something that you said, I think, is a really good starting point, which is, as a parenting college student, as soon as you step foot on campus, you don't feel like you belong. Most of the colleges across this country are not prioritizing the student parent population. Many of them aren't thinking about parenting college students as they're doing their work and designing their systems and rethinking policies. Sometimes it's just something as simple as making sure that there are diaper changing stations in your bathrooms, or that there are lactation rooms that are accessible to students. When I was a teen mom putting myself through college, I had a newborn baby. I had a 3-month-old when I started as a freshman, and I couldn't find a place to pump, and had to do that in the bathroom in between classes. And it was just so challenging. And so I knew immediately that this space was not designed for me to succeed, that I was in an environment that was for other students, and that my being here was going to be incredibly tough. There weren't going to be people and systems set up for me to succeed. And when we think about how important that sense of belonging is for students to succeed and to excel, for parenting students, as soon as you come onto a college campus, there is that feeling like I'm not welcome here. This space was not designed for me. And so that is really difficult. And when we think about how difficult it is to be both a caregiver and a college student, you have 50% less time than your peers who are not parenting. You have higher costs associated with going to college and just living expenses. You're having to navigate a childcare system that's completely unaffordable, in addition to the high costs of college tuition. So many things that are on your plate as a parenting student that make it even more difficult. And I think the other thing that we really try to help people to understand is that the student parent population in many ways is an umbrella population. And it includes students who are students of color. So parenting college students are more likely to be students of color. They're more likely to be students with low income, more likely to be first generation college students. And so when you think about the intersectionality of this population, the many responsibilities that they have, and the intersection of those identities, and how hard it is to be both a first generation college student and a parenting student and a student of color, like really thinking about how all of those layers begin to weigh down on a student, and you're moving through a system that's not designed for you to succeed. It's extremely hard. I think one of the most pervasive stereotypes that we see around young parents and student parents is that they're lazy, they don't want to go to college, or if they're in college, they're not trying hard. And on a day-to-day, you have to move mountains to be a parenting college student. It is so difficult because of everything I just described. What we see is the exact opposite, which is that these students are highly motivated. They have higher GPAs on average than their non-parenting peers because they want to create that better life for their children. So it's such a huge responsibility. There are so many things working against this population, and yet they're highly driven and highly motivated.
Your example about finding a place to pump was an interesting example of the challenges you faced. You did talk about this a little bit more in your article. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your own experience as a 19-year-old attending William and Mary. Can you tell us more about the challenges you faced yourself?
Yeah, so I got pregnant my senior year of high school. I was a college-bound student. I had just been accepted into several different colleges. when I discovered my pregnancy. And my parents were big proponents of college. It was always expected that both my sister and I would go to college after high school. That was just a given. And so when I discovered my pregnancy, it was devastating on many levels. And something that I always kind of just knew was going to happen, which was going to college, suddenly became uncertain. I wasn't sure how I was going to actually go to college as a mom. Nobody in my community, nobody in my school, my neighborhood who got pregnant went off to college. That just wasn't something that happened. And yet I also knew that it was going to be incredibly important for me to get my college degree if I wanted to provide a life for this little one. And so I had those things kind of warring inside of me of wanting this, wanting to go to college, but not knowing how to get there and knowing that this was not going to be an easy road at all. And so I found out I had been accepted into William and Mary when I was 8 months pregnant and living day to day in a Motel 6. I had taken some time off from school and had reapplied and reopened my application to William and Mary. And so that was my situation when I found out that I was going to William and Mary. It was very bleak. It was very dark. There was nothing about my life that said I was college bound. And yet it was so important for me to get there. And I describe it as, I think the Motel 6 was about an hour away from William and Mary's campus. And it felt like I needed a rocket ship to get there. That's just how far away my life felt from college. I started when my daughter was a little under 3 months old. And I always tell people I looked down at my feet and thought, this campus, these feet, were not designed do not belong on this campus. I felt very out of place. I knew that the students who were moving around me didn't have the responsibilities of being a parenting student. They had resources. They just had a whole different experience. And William and Mary, just like many schools and many four-year schools, didn't really know what to do with me. I was lumped in on my first day, my orientation day, with a group of transfer students who had totally different experiences. None of them were parenting. They already had 2 years of school under their belt. Here I was coming in as a freshman. Everything was new to me. I was a mom. And so I think that was a great example of I had to navigate my own way through college. I had to figure things out on my own. There wasn't a program or a system that was set up for me to help connect the dots. So it was a lot of self-advocacy. It was a lot of trial and error and a lot of time that went into trying to understand how to get to that graduation stage. Luckily, I did have a wonderful financial aid counselor who was really a champion for me and helped me access dollars that I needed to not only pay my tuition, but also pay my rent and put food on the table and try to pay daycare. And that was huge for me. And I think it's such an example of why champions on campuses are really needed for the student parent population, because my financial aid counselor was really life-saving for me in many ways. I did end up graduating with high honors in 4 years. I walked across the graduation stage with my daughter holding my hand, and it was it was truly an amazing experience, and one that really shaped our lives in many ways in terms of personally, just like, our trajectory, but then in terms of the work that I do now, it was certainly life-changing.
What a remarkable story. You describe how change is happening, apparently led by community colleges. What is changing to accommodate student parents?
Yeah, there are so many exciting things that are happening across the country and when it comes to student parent work. And we really do see community colleges as being the leaders in this work. By their very mission, community colleges are committed to serving students that don't necessarily fit that narrow definition that higher ed often caters to. And so we see community colleges as really being at the forefront of this work. But we've also seen some four-year schools that are all in and are really building out campuses that are more family friendly. And we're excited to see that work happening too, because we need everybody. We need all institutions investing in student parent work, because we want to see our community college students then transferring, right, and getting that 4-year degree. So it's going to be important that all institution types are aware of student parents and are really investing in making sure that they feel supported and they have what they need to complete. I think, again, the pandemic really accelerated the student parent work for many people because I think it made institutions look inward and say, who have we been allowing in the way that we've been doing business? Who have we been allowing to fall through the cracks? And student parents is definitely a population that has historically been allowed to fall through the cracks, has historically been under the radar, and people have not really recognized as being important in this kind of larger equity conversation. And so we're seeing folks looking at just tracking the parenting status of students. That seems like such a basic thing. In fact, when I started my organization, Generation Hope, I thought, I'm going to go to all of the schools in the DC area and ask them how many student parents they have. And they were all like, we don't track that data. And I thought, wow, that's crazy because it's such a big piece of the story in terms of who your student body is. And in reality, the vast majority of institutions are not collecting data on the parenting status of their students. I often tell people like we're paying so much more attention to basic needs and for example, food insecurity for college students, which is so important. And student parents are disproportionately experiencing food insecurity on college campuses. But wouldn't it be important to know that not only is that student food insecure, but they have 2 other mouths to feed? Right? Like it's such a big part of the story that we're not talking about. And most colleges are flying blind when it comes to collecting that data and understanding what their students are experiencing from a caregiving perspective. And so one of the things that we've really been encouraged by is that data collection is starting to happen. Many of the institutions that we work with at Generation Hope, in fact, in the work that we do on our technical assistance side, we're helping institutions stand up those data collection systems and enhance them over time. One of the institutions that we're working with just started collecting data this year on parenting status and found out that 1/3 of their student body is parenting while going to school. So
my goodness.
Yeah. And it's like, that's such important data to have. It can influence so much of what you're doing as an institution. So I think we've really been encouraged by that, as well as other important efforts, making sure that, you're re-examining policies that are really marginalizing this population, like no kids on campus policies. That's a pretty common institutional policy that we see at many schools across the country. And it can be really damaging if I'm a parenting student and I need to come to campus to meet with a professor to get a little bit of extra help on an exam the next day, but my childcare falls through, then I can't get that help and I can't come to campus. And what does that mean in terms of whether or not I'll do well on that test? And then not doing well on that test has a snowball effect, right? So just really thinking about all of the different aspects of this work. What we don't want is for institutions to kind of relegate this to one office and one person, but really to see all of the work that they do through that student parent lens, from financial aid to admissions to facilities, and figuring out how do we holistically serve this population across the institution.
Well, speaking of what you'd like to see, that's a nice segue to my final question for you. What would you like to see happen in the future to keep this progress going?
I think one big thing is I would like it to be commonplace for institutions to be collecting this data on their students, because data influences policy, it influences investments, it influences resources. And it's really easy to say as an institution, and I've had administrators say this to me, we don't have that problem here. And it's really easy to say that when you don't have the data. And what we're, helping institutions realize is that, one, it's not a problem. Student parents are not a problem. They're actually a huge asset to any institution. But 2, that you need the data to actually know what is happening on your campus and who your students are. And so we would love to see more institutions collecting this data so we can tell a fuller story about their student experience and whether or not they're completing what the resources and supports are that they need to actually complete. And I think it also influences larger policy. It influences policy at the regional, state, and federal level around resource allocation, how we think about college students, how we support college students through legislation, things like the child tax credit, for example. We know that's been a huge benefit to parenting college students, but they are not a part of that conversation. Or looking at affordable childcare and the movement for universal pre-K, for example, has really been focused on workers, and certainly rightly so, but not thinking about how does childcare and not having adequate and affordable childcare influence your ability to go and get your college degree as a parent. That population has really been invisible in these conversations. So we really want to see this data being collected so we can tell the full story about these students, what they're experiencing, and have some levers to pull from a policy perspective to help them succeed on a larger scale.
My guest has been Nicole Lynn Lewis, the CEO of Generation Hope, an organization that ensures all student parents have opportunities to succeed and experience economic mobility. She has joined me today to discuss her Atlantic article, How Colleges Tell Student Parents They Don't Belong. Nicole, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks for joining me. Please feel free to email me with questions, comments, or suggestions for content that you'd like to hear about. You can reach me at mortarboardpodcast@gmail.com. Consider stopping by my blog, mortarboardblog.com. The blog contains links to stories that I think will interest you, podcast transcripts, and articles I've written. You can also like me on Facebook at Dr. Daniel Barwick or follow me on Twitter at Daniel Barwick. Looking forward to talking with you in the next episode.